Imagine a world where loyalty is a lie, and love can be bought for a single coin. In 1861, in a small, sun-bleached town, a man looked at his own sister, not with care or protection, but with cold calculation. He saw opportunity. He saw power. He saw a way to turn her existence into currency. $1, 14 men, her body, her trust, her very soul reduced to a transaction that would shock even the darkest corners of the human imagination. But this is not just a story of cruelty. It is a story of awakening. In her submission, in her survival, something far stranger was born. She returned not broken, not defeated, but transformed, rich, insane, terrifying. In that transformation lies a truth most people are too comfortable to ignore. Wealth, power, and madness are rarely strangers. They are partners in a dance choreographed by the hidden, unseen forces that run our world. Consider the psychology at play. A sister sold by her own kin. Imagine the betrayal running like poison through her veins, the horror and humiliation. Yet in the shadows of that betrayal, she learned secrets the world will never admit to. She discovered the mechanisms of desire and control. She understood how men, ordinary, desperate, violent men, can be manipulated, how their greed and lust become instruments of another's ascendancy. She became a master of the very systems designed to break her, at a cost no ordinary person could bear. The delicate boundary between sanity and madness, morality and survival, humanity and something darker. By the time she returned, her eyes were no longer human. They were the eyes of someone who had walked through the underworld and returned with a ledger of debts owed to her. She spoke little, laughed occasionally, but that laughter was not joy. It was the sound of someone who had learned to trade fear for fortune, cruelty for cunning. In the echo of that laughter, the town began to change. Men who once believed themselves untouchable suddenly found themselves exposed, like mice in the glare of a hulk. She had learned the oldest secret of all. Power is always won, rarely given, and never forgiven. Tonight, we begin the journey into that dark history, a story of forbidden acts, hidden agendas, and invisible chains that bind us all. A story that whispers to the part of every man that craves knowledge no one else dares reveal. By the end of this tale, you will see the world differently. You will see the people around you differently. And perhaps, if you dare, you will begin to understand the dangerous mechanics of human desire and control that have existed since the first coin was ever exchanged for life. The morning after her sale, the town whispered as if the wind itself carried the shame. 14 men had taken what was never theirs to take, yet the blame scattered like dust, never landing where it truly belonged. They believed her spirit broken, her name ruined, but they had underestimated the dark resilience forged only in the crucible of betrayal. Every look, every whisper, every touch had been meant to crush her, yet each act became a lesson, a brutal tutorial in human weakness, greed, and desire. She watched, memorized, learned the rhythm of fear and pleasure, the way a man's ambition could be twisted into a leash, the way shame could be weaponized until it became armor. What they considered punishment, she transformed into instruction. The town thought they could contain her, control her, but in reality, she had begun building an empire inside her mind, brick by brick, thought by thought, shadow by shadow. Her return would not come with fanfare or apology. She did not ask for forgiveness, nor seek revenge in any ordinary way. She carried with her knowledge of the human condition that no man could anticipate, the intimate details of desire, the hidden layers of greed, the fragile structures of social power that collapse under the weight of precise manipulation. In every glance she offered, in every word she spoke, she wielded control invisible yet undeniable. Men who had once treated her like property now hesitated, puzzled by the aura she carried, an aura built from both suffering and mastery, from pain and the ruthless application of what they had inadvertently taught her. Madness, they said, had touched her mind, but what they mistook for insanity was clarity born from extreme exposure to human corruption. The line between reality and performance blurred, allowing her to operate with a freedom ordinary people could never achieve. Every coin they had spent, every slight they had inflicted, had purchased her understanding of power, a dark knowledge that would make them her instruments without their knowing. The town began to shift. Authority no longer rested where it had been assigned. Money no longer carried the full weight of control. Fear took shape in new forms, subtle yet absolute, and the men who had once prided themselves on domination now found themselves caught in a web they could not see. Her return was a signal. The rules had changed. The hierarchy of control, the unseen ledger of power, had been rewritten, and anyone who looked too closely would see the truth. Betrayal is only the beginning, and those who survive it can become architects of a reality far darker than any simple act of cruelty could ever produce. What she returned with was not merely wealth, but a terrifying, intimate understanding of the human mind, the kind of knowledge that only those who have been pushed to the edge of despair could ever acquire. She had witnessed how men betrayed one another for the smallest advantage, how promises disintegrated under pressure, and how fear and desire could be intertwined into an invisible leash that compelled obedience without a single word. Every gesture, every tone, every glance became a map of control, and she studied it all with the patience of a predator observing its prey. Her body had been offered to 14 men, but her mind remained untouchable, and in that untouchability lay the seed of her power. Those who thought they had broken her had, unknowingly, taught her the very mechanisms they themselves used to dominate, and she intended to use them against the world. She moved through the town like a shadow, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore. People sensed the change before they understood it, as if the air around her had shifted, carrying with it a subtle command that made men hesitate, women whisper, and children cling to their mothers a little tighter. It was not supernatural, not magical, but it was terrifying in its precision, an unseen authority that demanded recognition without explanation. She had learned to read the currents of human ambition and fear, to see the invisible levers that moved men, and to pull them quietly, with perfect timing. Each interaction became an experiment in influence, each encounter a lesson in the fragility of ego, each reaction proof that control could be exercised without force if applied with understanding and patience. By the end of the first month, the town had begun to realign itself around her presence. Men who had once held her in contempt now instinctively deferred, their actions guided by impulses they could not explain. Wealth, once a symbol of power, became meaningless in her presence. Influence, once a currency of authority, became a tool she wielded with invisible precision. Even the cleverest, the most cunning, discovered too late that they were players in a game whose rules had been rewritten without their knowledge. She had learned the oldest truth in human society. Real power is never granted, never inherited, and never visible until it is already in motion. It is learned in pain, seized in silence, and maintained through understanding that most will never possess. And so her legend began, whispered first in fear, then in awe, as those who had underestimated her slowly realized that the sister they tried to destroy had become something no one could touch or predict. She had crossed a threshold, one that separated ordinary victims from architects of reality, and from that moment forward, the town would never again be governed by the same rules. She did not return to the life she had known, nor did she seek the approval of those who had betrayed her. Instead, she stepped into a world that few could even perceive, a shadowed reality where influence and fear were currencies more valuable than gold. Every step she took, every word she uttered, was calculated to test the limits of human ambition, to uncover who could be manipulated and who would crumble under invisible pressure. The men who had once taken her for granted now became her unwitting instructors, revealing their weaknesses, their desires, the hidden patterns that governed their decisions, all without realizing they were offering her the map to their control. She moved with the precision of someone who had seen the machinery behind every smile, every handshake, every polite nod, understanding that society's polite veneer was nothing more than a thin film covering the raw hunger and fear that drove human behavior. Those who thought themselves powerful discovered too late that the sister they had attempted to enslave now held the ultimate leverage, knowledge. Knowledge of the desires men tried to hide, of the fears they dared not acknowledge, of the boundaries they believed were unbreakable. She began to experiment, subtly, invisibly, planting seeds of influence that would grow into control, not by force, but by understanding, by the application of insight so precise it was indistinguishable from fate itself. And as her influence spread, she realized another truth. The world is a network of invisible levers, and anyone who understands them can move mountains without lifting a finger. Those who underestimated her became tools, their actions bending to her will while they remained convinced they were autonomous, clever, and free. Madness, wealth, power. They were no longer separate forces but threads she wove together into a tapestry of dominion that the town could not see until it was too late. Each man who had participated in her humiliation unknowingly contributed to her rise. Each whispered insult, each greedy glance, Each violation became part of the infrastructure of her power. By the time she chose to act openly, the town had already begun to shift around her, its social hierarchies, its unspoken rules, its hidden alliances bending quietly, inevitably, to accommodate her presence. She had become the unseen architect of a new order, one that respected neither law nor tradition, one that operated in the quiet spaces between fear and desire, between madness and brilliance, and in that quiet dominion, she alone dictated the rules. By now, the town no longer merely observed her, they feared the very idea of her presence. It was not because she threatened with weapons or screamed her dominance, but because she had become an invisible force, a silent judge of character and weakness, capable of bending the will of men without a single raised hand. Every man who had once considered himself clever now found himself hesitating, doubting his decisions, wondering if each thought, each action, each word might somehow play into her unseen calculations. She had learned the art of reading intention, of predicting desire before it manifested, of exposing guilt without accusation. It was a skill born from the cruelest education, betrayal by those closest to her, humiliation at the hands of men, and survival in a world that demanded she surrender or perish. In that crucible, she had become something unnatural, something terrifyingly intelligent, a strategist whose battlefield was human behavior itself. And yet, there was an artistry to her method, a dark poetry in the way she manipulated the currents of influence, pulling and releasing tension until the entire social fabric of the town shifted subtly but irrevocably in her favor. No one could see it forming, but anyone who resisted her sway began to falter, to make errors that revealed their weaknesses, feeding the map she had drawn in her mind with their own hands. She realized something profound. Fear and respect could be indistinguishable when delivered with precision, and that the greatest power lay not in confrontation, but in invisibility, in the quiet accumulation of leverage until it became unstoppable. Her transformation was complete. No longer a victim, no longer a girl sold for a coin. She was a master, a shadow over the town's conscience, a whisper in the corners of every room, an unseen hand guiding every decision. Men who once claimed authority were now instruments of her subtle design, and every insult, every slight, every attempt to belittle her had become a thread in the intricate web of control she had woven. Even those who prided themselves on cunning could not escape the inevitability of her influence. Her presence had altered the rules of engagement, rewritten the unspoken codes of behavior, and redefined power itself. And in that redefinition, she understood a secret few ever grasp. Domination is not seized by force, nor granted by status. It is claimed in silence, in patience, in understanding the machinery of human desire. And she, more than anyone, had become its undisputed architect. As weeks turned into months, her influence became undeniable, yet it remained invisible to those who underestimated her. The town's social order began to bend subtly, almost imperceptibly, around her presence, like wind shaping sand in patterns that only the patient can see. Every glance she cast, every word she spoke, carried layers of meaning that few could detect, but all who encountered her felt the effect: hesitation, doubt, fear, fascination. She had learned to weaponize observation, to turn attention itself into leverage, understanding that the smallest detail, a twitch, a sigh, a glance away, could reveal more than brute force ever could. She was no longer just the sister they had tried to destroy. She was a force operating in the interstices of society, invisible yet omnipresent, capable of guiding action without ever lifting a hand. Men who had once taken her for granted now second-guessed every choice, every desire, every ambition, unknowingly offering their own weaknesses to her strategic mind. It was a terrifying clarity. She realized that human behavior is predictable if one knows where to look, and that power is most complete when it is unseen. Her wealth, though impressive, was merely a tool. Her true treasure was knowledge, the ability to anticipate and direct human action, to bend intention like iron beneath her fingers. And yet, she did not flaunt this mastery, for she understood that the loudest displays of power invite resistance, while quiet manipulation breeds inevitability. Slowly, imperceptibly, the town became her experiment. Every whisper, every gossip, every secret desire revealed itself to her, feeding the growing architecture of influence she had constructed. She understood the truth that no one else would admit. Control is a currency, and those who wield it quietly always outlast those who brandish it loudly. By the time anyone noticed the shift, it was already too late. The instruments of her influence were embedded so deeply that rebellion was impossible without exposing oneself to complete ruin. Her transformation was complete. The girl sold for $1 had become an unseen sovereign, a silent architect of fear and desire, a living proof that the greatest power is neither inherited nor stolen, but meticulously earned through observation, patience, and the intimate understanding of human weakness. And in that quiet dominion, she alone determined who would rise, who would fall, and who would forever remain at the mercy of her unseen hand. By now, the town itself seemed to tremble beneath the subtle weight of her presence. No proclamation, no threat, no overt action was required. Her influence had become a force so precise, so deliberate, that even the cleverest men could not comprehend it. Every conversation, every transaction, every casual exchange had begun to fall under her unseen scrutiny, and those who underestimated her were unwittingly complicit in their own subjugation. She had discovered the unspoken laws that govern human behavior, the way guilt can be turned into obedience, how greed becomes a leash when carefully guided, and how fear need not roar to dominate. It only needs to whisper in the right moment. Her past suffering had been the teacher, her humiliation the syllabus, and now she operated as an expert, a silent conductor orchestrating the impulses of those around her with deadly precision. The men who had once claimed authority over her now stumbled in her shadow, their ambitions diverted, their confidence undermined by invisible hands. Even the women of the town, those who had once ignored her or treated her lightly, found themselves drawn into the currents of her subtle control, responding to signals they could not name, bending to patterns only she understood. Every action she took, though outwardly mundane, was a calculated move in a grand design that none could see but her, a design that reshaped the town's social structure, redistributed power, and exposed the fragility of those who believed themselves untouchable. She had become a master of invisible warfare, a strategist whose battlefield was not land or wealth, but the minds, desires, and fears of others. And in this quiet dominion, she realized the ultimate truth, that real power is not about domination in plain sight, but the invisible architecture of influence, the delicate manipulation of choices and perception, and the ability to create consequences so precise that resistance itself becomes an illusion. By the time anyone comprehended her reach, the town had already adapted to her control, its social currents altered irrevocably, its most confident men reduced to hesitant players, and its whispers carrying the unacknowledged acknowledgement that she was no longer just a survivor of betrayal. She was the architect of a reality none dared to oppose. As her control solidified, it became evident that she was no longer bound by the ordinary limits of human influence. She had crossed into a domain where perception itself bent to her will. The town's hierarchy, once rigid and predictable, now shifted subtly around her, each member unconsciously calibrating their actions to her presence, their desires and fears aligning with her invisible currents. Men who had once wielded power with confidence now faltered, their decisions tainted by hesitation and doubt, their egos quietly eroded by the realization that the sister they had once exploited now possessed the kind of authority no amount of wealth or status could buy. Even the alliances they had carefully constructed against one another began to unravel under her touch, for she understood the intricate architecture of loyalty and betrayal, and how to manipulate both with near imperceptible adjustments. She had learned to move in silence, to observe without being observed, to predict outcomes without drawing attention to her methods, and in doing so, she became something beyond ordinary comprehension, a force that existed in the spaces between thought and action, desire and restraint, ambition and fear. Her past torment had sharpened her instincts to a razor's edge, teaching her the cruel mathematics of human behavior. Every humiliation absorbed, every insult endured, every slight registered became data she could use to manipulate, predict, and ultimately control those who had once assumed dominion over her. Slowly, imperceptibly, her reputation began to precede her. Whispers spread of her uncanny ability to anticipate moves, to read intentions before they were voiced, to bend events without seeming interference, and with each whispered tale, her power grew, not through violence, but through the careful orchestration of fear, admiration, and uncertainty. By the time the town realized that the girl sold for $1 had returned as a master of minds, she had already rewritten the rules of influence. She had demonstrated that domination is not inherited, that wealth can be powerless without insight, and that survival through betrayal is only the beginning of a journey toward mastery. Those who once thought themselves immune to manipulation now trembled, caught in the invisible threads of a design, and they began to understand, too late, that she was no longer merely a survivor. She was the arbiter of reality itself. Her mastery grew not from force, but from understanding the hidden impulses that drove those around her, the unspoken needs, fears, and desires that made men predictable and women cautious. Every interaction became a study, every reaction a clue, every hesitation a lever she could use to bend reality to her design. The men who had once treated her like property now found themselves ensnared, their arrogance and lust turned against them, each believing they acted of their own volition, while she quietly steered the currents of their decisions. She had discovered the invisible economy of human behavior, the trade of fear for favor, guilt for influence, shame for obedience, and she operated within it with surgical precision. Her wealth was trivial compared to the dominion she had crafted: control over perception, over expectation, over the fragile structures that held the town's social order together. Even the proudest, most calculating men began to second-guess themselves, subtly shifting their alliances, their choices, their words, as if an unseen hand had moved the pieces before they even knew the game had begun. The women, too, who had once dismissed or ignored her, now navigated her presence with unspoken deference, sensing that resistance was futile against someone who had turned survival into strategy and trauma into weaponized knowledge. She had become a force in the margins, existing in the spaces no one considered, but touching every life, every transaction, every whisper, until the town itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with her unseen will. Madness and brilliance had merged in her mind, creating a clarity others could not endure. She could anticipate motives, expose hypocrisy, and exploit weaknesses with such precision that her influence felt preordained, inevitable. And yet, she never revealed the depth of her understanding, letting her opponents believe they retained some control, while in reality, she was already steps ahead, calculating every consequence, every ripple, every collapse before it could manifest. By the time anyone suspected her, it was already too late. She had become the hidden architect of their fates, an invisible force shaping lives, fortunes, and the very social fabric of the town, proving a terrifying truth: those who survive ultimate betrayal, who endure humiliation and emerge unbroken, are capable of creating a power no one dares challenge. By this point, her influence was no longer subtle. It had become absolute in ways most could not even define. The town operated around her presence, yet few realized it. Men and women alike adjusted their choices, their alliances, their words, without consciously knowing why, as if some invisible gravity pulled them into alignment with her will. She had become a master not of force, but of perception, bending reality without raising her voice, shaping desire without offering promise, turning fear into obedience, and curiosity into devotion. Every interaction, no matter how mundane, was a calculated move in a game no one else even knew they were playing. She had learned to exploit the blind spots in human ambition, the small cracks in morality where weakness and greed converged, and she did so with precision and patience, like a sculptor carving influence from the raw material of human behavior. Those who had once believed themselves untouchable, the men who had bought and sold her, the women who had whispered behind her back, now moved as pieces on her board, guided by impulses she had subtly shaped. Her mind had become an engine of prediction, able to anticipate choices, desires, and betrayals before they materialized, a terrifying clarity forged in the fires of humiliation and survival. Madness had touched her, yes, but what others called insanity was merely the clarity born from seeing the hidden mechanisms of human nature laid bare. By understanding the hidden ledger of fear, desire, and ambition, she had become not only untouchable but unavoidable. The town's social fabric bent around her imperceptibly, each thread drawn tight by her unseen hand, until resistance became unthinkable, rebellion impossible without exposing one's weakness to catastrophic effect. She had become the arbiter of a new reality, one where power was invisible, influence silent, and domination owned in the shadows rather than granted in the light. And now, as her control solidified, she began to realize the full scope of what survival had granted her: the ability to remake a world in her image, to rewrite the rules of obedience and desire, and to demonstrate a truth that terrifies the comfortable and excites the ambitious alike: that knowledge, patience, and understanding of human weakness are the deadliest tools a person can wield. Her rise was no longer a secret. It was a force the town could feel but never name, a shadow pressing against every interaction, every decision, every hidden ambition. Men who once flaunted dominance now hesitated, their bravado faltering under the subtle pressure of her unseen hand, and women, sensing the invisible current she controlled, began to defy, strategize, and adapt in ways they could not articulate. She had transformed betrayal into a weapon and humiliation into education, forging a mind capable of seeing the architecture of desire and fear in every human interaction. Every slight, every whisper, every act of greed or lust had been a lesson she stored like treasure, and now she deployed that knowledge with meticulous precision. The town's hierarchy began to reassemble itself without any visible sign of her intervention. She had become the hidden architect of their lives, anticipating moves, predicting desires, and subtly redirecting ambition as a gardener might guide a creeping vine. Her power was not overt, yet absolute. The men who had sold her thought themselves masters, but they were already instruments of her design, dancing to rhythms she alone had composed. Madness and brilliance had fused within her, producing a clarity that allowed her to operate several steps ahead of anyone else, to exploit weaknesses before they were acknowledged, and to turn their strength into compliance. She understood the most terrifying principle of human nature. Control does not require force. It requires knowledge, observation, and patience, and once applied with precision, it renders opposition meaningless. Her wealth and status were trivial beside this mastery. It was the invisible ledger of influence she had constructed that now governed the town. And as the people around her adjusted unknowingly to her will, she realized the ultimate truth. Survivors of ultimate betrayal are not merely scarred. They are transformed into predators capable of reshaping reality itself. Every action she took, though outwardly subtle, was a demonstration of this dangerous knowledge, a lesson the town would learn too late. Power is invisible, influence is silent, and those who endure the deepest betrayals have the capacity to command the fates of everyone around them without ever appearing to lift a hand at why now. Her presence had become a living force, a quiet gravity that shaped thought, action, and desire without a single word of explanation. The men who had once exploited her now found themselves ensnared in patterns they could not recognize, subtly compelled to act in ways that reinforced her dominion, their ambitions quietly redirected, their fears quietly amplified. She had learned to read the invisible currents that govern human behavior, to anticipate impulse before it became action, and to turn even resistance into a mechanism of her control. Every whispered insult, every act of greed, every glance of lust had fed the architecture of her influence, providing raw material she sculpted into precision control. The town itself began to shift imperceptibly, its social hierarchy bending without awareness, its alliances, rivalries, and loyalties recalibrated in alignment with her unseen hand. She moved through this evolving reality like a ghost, invisible yet omnipresent, observing, calculating, and shaping, understanding that the greatest power lies not in force but in the subtle orchestration of perception and expectation. Her mastery over human behavior was so complete that even those who believed themselves cleverest could not escape it. Their choices, words, and actions were guided, imperceptibly, to serve her objectives. She had become a strategist whose battlefield was not land or money, but the very hearts and minds of the people around her, bending them without their knowledge. And in that quiet dominion, she realized the ultimate truth of human control. The strongest are rarely those who strike hardest, but those who see the patterns others cannot, who understand the machinery of desire and fear, and who can manipulate it invisibly, relentlessly, and without remorse. Madness had sharpened her insight, suffering had forged her precision, and betrayal had provided her the tools to construct a network of influence so invisible, so complete, that the town itself had become an extension of her will, a living testament to the terrifying potential of one who survives unimaginable cruelty and emerges not broken, but architect of the unseen world around them. Her dominion was no longer confined to subtle influence. It had become a force that shaped reality itself, bending the town's social structure and the desires of its people without their awareness. Every man who had once exploited her now acted in ways she had already anticipated, their ambitions quietly redirected, their choices aligned with a plan they could not see. Every woman who had dismissed her or envied her position now adapted, unconsciously deferring, strategizing, and responding to cues she alone had set in motion. She had transformed suffering into strategy, humiliation into insight, and betrayal into a blueprint for absolute control. Madness had sharpened her mind, forging an instinct for predicting human behavior that no ordinary person could match, and her wealth, once a tool of status, now seemed irrelevant next to the invisible empire of influence she had built. Every gesture, glance, and word had become a lever in her hands, every subtle interaction a way to reinforce her silent authority. Those who believed themselves cleverest were already caught in her design, acting out patterns she had orchestrated without ever needing to intervene openly. She understood the terrifying principle that real power is not taken by force but quietly, invisibly, through patient observation and strategic manipulation. And in the midst of this quiet dominion, she recognized that the greatest weapon of all is knowledge, the ability to see the hidden mechanics of human desire, ambition, and fear, and to turn them into tools for shaping reality. The town, unaware of the transformation, had become a living instrument, its people dancing to rhythms they could not perceive, its social fabric rewoven under the hand of a sister they had once sought to destroy. She had become both invisible and indispensable, the silent arbiter of outcomes, the unseen architect of control, proving a truth that chills the soul. Those who endure ultimate betrayal, who survive humiliation and degradation, do not merely recover. They evolve into predators capable of reshaping the world around them in ways that others cannot even comprehend. Her presence had grown into an unshakable force, a shadow in every conversation, a gravity in every decision, so that the town itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with her will without ever noticing. Men who had once taken her for granted now doubted themselves at every turn, their confidence eroded, their strategies quietly subverted by the invisible patterns she had traced across their lives. Women who had once dismissed or envied her now found themselves bending subtly, following cues they could not name, adjusting behavior to avoid unseen consequences. She had transformed every act of cruelty, every moment of humiliation, every betrayal into tools for mastering the psychology of those around her, turning trauma into insight, suffering into strategy. Madness and clarity had fused within her, creating a mind capable of anticipating human action before it emerged, predicting desire, fear, and weakness with terrifying precision. She had become a silent engineer of human behavior, reshaping loyalty, ambition, and morality to suit the designs of her invisible empire. Wealth, reputation, and social standing were meaningless compared to the dominion she now wielded through understanding alone, a dominion no one could resist because they were unaware it existed. Every interaction became an experiment, every hesitation a lever, every glance a test, and she operated with patience and precision, moving people as if they were pieces on a chessboard they could not even see. And as her influence deepened, a more profound truth emerged. Survival through betrayal grants a perspective few can endure, an ability to perceive the hidden currents that guide human action and to bend them to one's will without ever showing force. Those who had sought to destroy her had inadvertently trained her to dominate, and she did so quietly, invisibly, irrevocably. By this point, the town's entire social fabric had been reshaped under her hand, subtly, invisibly, as if reality itself had shifted to accommodate the presence of a sister they had once sold for $1. And in that invisible control lay the most dangerous lesson of all. The person who endures ultimate humiliation and emerges unbroken does not merely survive. They become untouchable, the silent architect of the fates of everyone around them, a living demonstration that knowledge, patience, and precise understanding of human weakness are the deadliest powers a human can wield now. Her control was absolute in ways the town could sense but never name. Even those who considered themselves cleverest were ensnared in patterns she had already designed, acting in alignment with her will without realizing it. Every glance, every word, every subtle gesture became a lever of influence, a silent instruction in obedience, and she wielded them with the precision of someone who had seen the deepest machinery of human desire and fear. Men who had once exploited her for pleasure or profit now moved like instruments in her orchestration, their choices quietly redirected, their ambitions quietly corralled, while women adjusted behavior unconsciously, sensing her authority in ways they could not articulate. Madness had sharpened her insight, suffering had honed her strategy, betrayal had handed her the tools to read, predict, and manipulate human behavior with a precision no ordinary mind could comprehend. Her power was invisible, yet undeniable, bending perception, desire, and action without anyone realizing they had been bent. And now, she revealed the ultimate truth she had learned in the crucible of humiliation. Survival alone is insufficient, knowledge alone is insufficient. The only path to true dominance lies in understanding the hidden currents of human behavior and shaping them silently, invisibly, relentlessly. At this point, She turned to the watchers, those who dared to witness a story, and whispered a challenge into the void. If you are ready to see beyond the veil, to acknowledge the currents that shape your own life, type the words "I see the shadows" twice in the comments, and claim the transformation that comes with understanding the mechanisms of fear, desire, and control. This is not mere participation. It is a symbolic initiation, a ritual acknowledgement that the knowledge of power is dangerous, intoxicating, and life-altering. The lesson is clear. Those who endure ultimate betrayal, who survive humiliation and manipulation, are capable of reshaping the reality of everyone around them, bending wills and rewriting destinies without ever showing their hand. And in this, the town itself became a living testament to her mastery, a subtle, invisible proof that knowledge, patience, and understanding of human weakness are the deadliest forces in existence, and that anyone who claims this awareness must be prepared to walk a path few dare to follow. Her dominion now extended beyond simple influence. It had become an invisible architecture, a network of control woven through the minds, ambitions, and fears of every person in the town. Men who had once flaunted authority found themselves second-guessing every decision, hesitation gnawing at their confidence, while women who had once dismissed or envied her now aligned unconsciously, their instincts guiding them toward behavior she had already predicted. Every act of cruelty, every slight, every moment of greed or lust had become raw material, fed into a mind honed by suffering and sharpened by betrayal, and transformed into leverage of unimaginable precision. Madness and clarity coexisted in her thoughts, giving her the capacity to anticipate motives before they emerged, to predict desires before they were voiced, and to turn resistance into compliance without ever revealing her hand. She moved through the town like a phantom, unseen but omnipresent, orchestrating the flow of human behavior with an artistry that seemed preordained, inevitable, unstoppable. The town itself had become her instrument. Social alliances shifted subtly, ambitions bent without acknowledgement, and whispered fears reinforced her silent supremacy. She understood, with terrifying clarity, that true power is invisible, that domination does not require force when one knows how to manipulate perception, expectation, and human weakness. Every person, even those most confident in their own intellect, was caught in a web they could not perceive, their every action feeding her designs, her invisible empire expanding with each unconscious compliance. The lesson she embodied was brutal yet simple. Those who survive ultimate betrayal, endure humiliation, and transform suffering into insight do not merely reclaim agency. They transcend ordinary humanity, becoming masters of influence, architects of fate, and silent arbiters of reality. And so, as the town moved in knowingly to the rhythm she dictated, she remained both invisible and indispensable, a living demonstration of the terrifying truth that knowledge, patience, and understanding of human frailty are the deadliest weapons one can possess, and that anyone who dares to wield them must be prepared to see the world as it truly is, a network of desires, fears, and hidden levers waiting for the one who knows how to pull them. By now, her influence had become a force that shaped reality itself, imperceptible yet undeniable, bending the thoughts, choices, and ambitions of everyone around her without their awareness. Men who once believed themselves untouchable now acted hesitantly, second-guessing every word and gesture, while women navigated her presence with an unconscious deference, adjusting their behavior to avoid unseen consequences. She had learned to read the hidden signals in every interaction, to anticipate motives before they were formed, and to exploit weakness before it had a chance to reveal itself. Every humiliation she had suffered, every betrayal she had endured, had been transformed into a blueprint of power. Every slight, every act of greed or lust, every whisper in the shadows had become material she could manipulate with precision. Madness had sharpened her perception, suffering had forged her patience, and betrayal had handed her the tools to orchestrate human behavior with a mastery no ordinary mind could hope to achieve. The town's social structure bent subtly, almost imperceptibly, to accommodate her unseen hand, its hierarchy shifting, its alliances reforming, its most confident men now unwittingly acting in service to her design. She understood the terrifying simplicity of influence. One need not shout, one need not strike, one need not demand. The careful application of knowledge, timing, and observation suffices to bend the strongest wills. Every person around her, even those convinced of their cleverness, became instruments in her design, their actions feeding the invisible machinery she had constructed. By mastering the currents of desire, fear, and ambition, She had become the silent architect of the town's reality, proving a dangerous truth. Ultimate betrayal does not merely break a person. It grants the vision, the patience, and the precision required to dominate unseen, to control without exposure, and to rewrite the rules of power itself. Those who had sold, scorned, or dismissed her were now moving pieces on a board they could not perceive, their fates quietly and irreversibly entwined with hers, and in that quiet mastery lay a truth that chills and commands alike. Those who survive unimaginable cruelty do not simply endure. They ascend. Her dominion had reached a point where it no longer required active intervention. The town itself had become a living instrument of her design, its social currents flowing in harmony with the patterns she had etched into its consciousness. Men who had once wielded authority with arrogance now stumbled, their intentions diverted, their ambitions quietly repurposed to serve outcomes they could neither see nor resist, while women, sensing the subtle weight of her presence, adjusted their choices instinctively, aligning with invisible expectations they could not name. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every act of greed or lust she had endured or observed became data, feeding an unseen system of control she maintained with surgical precision, a system so intricate that no one could perceive the full architecture until it was already complete. Madness and brilliance coexisted within her mind, granting her the ability to anticipate desires before they surfaced, to exploit weaknesses before they were acknowledged, and to convert resistance into compliance with a subtlety that felt preordained, inevitable, and unavoidable. Her wealth and outward status mattered little. The true power she wielded lay in knowledge, in patience, and in the meticulous orchestration of human behavior, an invisible force that shaped the town without ever announcing itself. The cleverest men, the most calculating women, all operated within patterns she had quietly imposed, their actions reinforcing her control without realizing it, feeding the ever-expanding network of influence she commanded. She understood, more clearly than anyone, that the greatest mastery comes not from confrontation, but from invisibility, from observing and guiding, from bending reality without ever showing the hand that moves it. And as the town shifted beneath her quiet authority, she realized the full scope of the dangerous knowledge she possessed. Betrayal, humiliation, and suffering do not simply teach survival. They forge the capacity to dominate unseen, to command without declaration, and to reshape the world around you with invisible precision, leaving all who encounter you forever altered, their fates silently entwined with yours. Her influence was no longer just a tool. It had become an ecosystem, a living network of psychological dominion that moved and adapted without her conscious direction, sustained by the patterns of fear, desire, and ambition she had quietly cultivated. Men who had once believed themselves masters of their own choices now found their decisions subtly guided, their confidence undermined, their intentions bent without their awareness, while women who had once dismissed or envied her now followed unspoken cues, instinctively aligning their behavior with the invisible rules she had established. Every act of betrayal, every moment of greed, every whispered insult had become fuel, feeding the architecture of influence she had constructed with surgical precision, a structure that no one could see until they were already trapped within it. Madness and clarity had fused into a terrifying insight. She could anticipate human action before it emerged, detect desires before they were acknowledged, and convert resistance into compliance without ever revealing the mechanisms of her control. Her wealth and reputation were trivial. The true currency she wielded was knowledge of human frailty, patience born from suffering, and the ability to manipulate perception with invisible force. Even the town's most cunning, most confident men and women were now instruments of her design, acting in alignment with her while believing they were autonomous, their choices feeding her dominion, reinforcing the subtle yet absolute network of influence she maintained. She understood, more profoundly than anyone could, that the strongest power is invisible, that domination does not require confrontation, only the patient, deliberate orchestration of human psychology, and that those who survive ultimate betrayal possess the capacity to reshape the reality of everyone around them without ever revealing their hand. And as the town unwittingly conformed to her patterns, she became more than a survivor. She became the silent architect of fate, a shadow moving through the lives of others with a precision so exacting that it was indistinguishable from inevitability, proving that those who endure unimaginable cruelty can emerge not broken, but untouchable, the masters of worlds that exist quietly beside ordinary perception. By now, her control was woven so deeply into the town's daily life that no one could act without passing through her invisible filter, The very fabric of society moved in quiet deference to a power they could not perceive. Men who had once exploited, dominated, and betrayed her were now unknowingly executing her will, their decisions subtly reshaped, their ambitions redirected, their desires guided by invisible levers she had planted with calculated precision. Women who had envied, dismissed, or whispered behind her back now unconsciously aligned themselves to her authority, responding to subtle cues she alone had set in motion. Every humiliation she had endured, every betrayal she had suffered, every whispered slight or greedy glance became material she could manipulate, a blueprint for domination she deployed without revealing the hand that moved it. Madness and clarity had fused into something terrifying, a mind that could predict, anticipate, and shape human behavior before it had even formed, turning resistance into compliance, doubt into submission, and ambition into instruments of her design. Wealth, titles, and outward influence were meaningless compared to the silent empire she had built, one constructed not of stone or coin but of observation, patience, and the intimate knowledge of human weakness. Even the cleverest, most calculating minds were caught within her web, their actions feeding her dominion while they remained convinced of their own freedom. She had become the invisible architect of fate, a force that shaped outcomes without being seen, demonstrating the cruelest and most powerful truth. Those who survive ultimate betrayal and humiliation do not simply endure. They ascend, becoming capable of bending reality itself to their will, mastering the currents of desire, fear, and ambition that move every human action, and leaving all who encounter them irrevocably altered, living proof that unseen mastery is far deadlier than any weapon ever wielded openly. Her power had become systemic, a quiet but absolute force that infiltrated every thought, every choice, every impulse within the town, so that people acted in alignment with her design before they even realized they were participating. Men who once regarded themselves as masters now hesitated constantly, their decisions subtly corralled, their egos quietly eroded by invisible pressures they could neither name nor resist. Women, sensing an authority they could not see, moved in ways that reinforced her control, their compliance unconscious yet perfect in its execution. Every act of betrayal, every humiliation, every greed-driven glance, had fed her mind with a pattern she now orchestrated like a symphony, transforming pain and suffering into the architecture of domination. Madness and insight had merged, granting her the terrifying clarity to predict human behavior with near-absolute accuracy, to manipulate outcomes before they could emerge, and to convert even defiance into unwitting obedience. The town had become an ecosystem of influence, a living proof that domination does not require confrontation, subtle orchestration, precise timing, and understanding of desire and fear are sufficient to bend the strongest wills. Even the most confident, calculating men and women operated within her invisible framework, their actions feeding her empire while they remained blind to it, believing themselves autonomous. And in this silent supremacy, she understood the ultimate truth. Survival through ultimate betrayal does not merely produce resilience, it creates predators capable of reshaping reality, bending perception and behavior with precision, and ensuring that everyone who encounters them becomes, consciously or not, part of the system they cannot escape. By mastering the invisible mechanics of influence, she had ascended beyond victimhood, beyond ordinary power, and had become the unseen architect of fate itself, demonstrating that knowledge, patience, and understanding of human frailty are deadlier than any sword, wealth, or title ever could be. Her dominion now extended beyond individuals. It had become a living, breathing force that shaped the collective consciousness of the town, bending alliances, ambitions, and loyalties without a single, visible act. Men who had once treated her as property now moved as if guided by invisible strings, their choices quietly manipulated, their desires aligned with her unseen design, while women adapted instinctively, responding to subtle cues that confirmed her authority without conscious thought. Every betrayal, every insult, every act of greed or lust she had endured had been absorbed, catalogued, and transformed into instruments of control, and she deployed them with the precision of a surgeon wielding scalpel and scalpel alone. Madness and clarity coexisted in her mind, granting her the ability to anticipate motives before they formed, to exploit weaknesses before they were recognized, and to transform resistance into obedience without ever revealing her hand. The town's social fabric had become an extension of her will, its hierarchy, its alliances, its unspoken codes all moved in synchrony with patterns she had designed invisibly. Even those most confident in their intellect and cunning found themselves constrained, their actions feeding her network of influence while they remained blind to their own manipulation. She understood that the deadliest form of power is invisible, not held in coins, titles, or brute force, but in the patient orchestration of perception, desire, and fear. And in that invisible supremacy lay the most terrifying truth. Those who endure ultimate betrayal, humiliation, and suffering are not merely survivors. They are predators of a higher order, capable of rewriting the rules of human interaction, bending reality itself to their will, and leaving every person they touch irrevocably altered. By mastering the currents that drive human thought and behavior, she had become untouchable, a silent architect of fate whose influence extended far beyond what anyone could see, proving that the true measure of power is knowledge applied without exposure, patience exercised without haste, and insight wielded without mercy. Her control had become a quiet omnipresence, a force that moved through the town's streets, conversations, and alliances like a current no one could see but all were compelled to follow. Men who once believed themselves untouchable now faltered, their ambitions subtly diverted, their confidence eroded by pressures they could not perceive, while women instinctively shifted their behavior to accommodate the invisible authority she radiated. Every humiliation she had suffered, every betrayal she had endured, every slight or act of greed she had observed had become raw material for her designs, feeding a mental architecture so precise that resistance became impossible without self-destruction. Madness had sharpened her perception, suffering had forged patience, and betrayal had handed her the tools to manipulate human behavior with surgical precision. She had become a master not through overt force, but through understanding, the anticipation of desires, the exposure of weaknesses, and the quiet orchestration of fear and hope in such a way that those around her acted in alignment with her will without ever knowing it. Even the cleverest, most calculating minds were instruments of her design, their actions feeding her invisible empire while they remained oblivious, believing themselves autonomous. The town itself had become a living proof of her power, alliances restructured, loyalties shifted, and social hierarchies bent to the rhythms she had quietly established. She understood, with terrifying clarity, that real mastery requires invisibility, patience, and intimate knowledge of human weakness, and that ultimate survival transforms ordinary victims into predators capable of reshaping reality itself. And so, she moved among them as both shadow and architect, silently dictating outcomes, bending perception, and demonstrating that those who endure ultimate humiliation and betrayal do not merely survive, they ascend to a level of power that renders them untouchable, shaping the world and everyone in it without ever exposing the hand that guides them. Her influence had grown so complete that the town itself seemed to breathe in alignment with her invisible will, its people acting in ways preordained by a quiet mastery, unaware that their choices, alliances, and ambitions had been subtly redirected. Men who had once flaunted dominance now hesitated, their decisions filtered through the invisible architecture she had created, their confidence quietly undermined while their actions reinforced her control. Women who had dismissed or envied her adapted instinctively, following signals they could not consciously recognize, weaving themselves into the intricate web of obedience she had designed. Every betrayal, every slight, every act of greed or lust that she had endured or witnessed had been transformed into a tool of domination, and she wielded these tools with such precision that the process itself remained invisible. Madness and clarity coexisted in her mind, granting her the capacity to anticipate human behavior before it emerged, to exploit weaknesses before they were acknowledged, and to tame defiance into compliance without ever revealing her hand. Her wealth, her outward status, her reputation, these were meaningless compared to the silent empire she had built, one constructed of observation, insight, and the precise orchestration of human psychology. Even the most confident and calculating men and women acted in alignment with her designs, feeding the network of influence that had become the engine of her dominion. She understood that the deadliest form of power is invisible, that real mastery lies not in confrontation but in the patient, deliberate shaping of perception, desire, and fear. And in that mastery, she demonstrated a terrifying truth: ultimate betrayal and humiliation do not merely teach survival, they grant the insight, precision, and patience required to bend reality itself, shaping human behavior, outcomes, and social structures without ever revealing the hand that moves them, leaving everyone caught in her invisible empire forever altered, incapable of reclaiming autonomy, and unknowingly complicit in her unstoppable design. By this point, her mastery over the town had become absolute. Though invisible, the people moved as if on instinct, responding to currents she had quietly shaped without ever revealing her influence. Men who had once claimed power found themselves uncertain, hesitant, their decisions quietly corralled by invisible levers they could not perceive, while women adapted unconsciously, aligning their behavior with signals they could not name. Every betrayal she had suffered, every humiliation she had endured, every act of greed or lust she had observed had been catalogued and transformed into instruments of control, feeding the invisible architecture she had constructed with surgical precision. Madness had sharpened her perception, suffering had forged her patience, and betrayal had taught her the mechanisms of human weakness with clarity no ordinary mind could comprehend. She understood that true power is invisible, that domination does not require confrontation, and that patience, observation, and knowledge of human frailty are deadlier than any weapon or fortune. Even the most clever, calculating individuals were instruments of her design, their choices reinforcing her dominion while they remained blind to it, believing themselves free. The town itself had become a living testament to her control. Alliances shifted, loyalties reformed, and the social order subtly realigned, all without anyone fully realizing the source of the change. And she recognized the ultimate truth that no one else could. Those who endure ultimate betrayal, humiliation, and suffering do not merely recover. They ascend, evolving into predators capable of bending reality itself to their will. Knowledge became her currency, patience a strategy, and understanding human desire and fear her weapon, allowing her to orchestrate the fates of all who crossed her path. By mastering these invisible forces, she had transformed herself into an untouchable architect of influence, proving that power is not claimed in open combat, but in the silent, precise manipulation of human thought, perception, and behavior. A mastery so complete that those who encounter it are forever altered, unknowingly complicit in a design they can never escape. Her dominion had become a silent epidemic, a force moving through the town so subtly that no one could resist its pull without exposing their own weaknesses. Men who had once exploited her now moved like shadows of themselves, their decisions quietly corralled, their ambitions redirected, their confidence eroded by an authority they could not perceive. Women, sensing the invisible current she controlled, adjusted instinctively, following cues they could not name, aligning their desires and actions with the architecture she had laid without ever seeing it. Every betrayal, every slight, every act of greed or lust she had endured or observed had become a tool, a thread in a web of influence so intricate that resistance was rendered futile before it even existed. Madness and brilliance had fused within her, granting the terrifying clarity to anticipate motives, predict desires, and transform opposition into obedience without ever revealing the hand that guided it. Wealth, status, and reputation were irrelevant compared to the invisible empire she had built, one composed entirely of observation, insight, and the precise manipulation of human behavior. Even the most confident, calculating minds acted in alignment with her design, feeding her silent power while remaining utterly unaware. She had learned the ultimate truth. The strongest domination is invisible, patience is more lethal than force, and understanding human frailty is the deadliest weapon. Those who survive ultimate betrayal and humiliation are not simply resilient. They evolve into predators capable of bending the currents of desire, fear, and ambition themselves, rewriting the reality of everyone around them without revealing a single move. And as the town unconsciously aligned with her will, she demonstrated that true mastery is quiet, invisible, and terrifyingly precise. Those who endure the cruelest betrayals emerge not just unbroken, but untouchable, architects of a reality none dare oppose, forever shaping lives while remaining unseen. Their influence absolute and irreversible. By this stage, her control was no longer simply influence, it was inevitability. The town moved as if preordained, its people reacting not to circumstance, but to the invisible architecture she had constructed from their desires, fears, and weaknesses. Men who had once thought themselves clever now faltered constantly, their decisions subtly manipulated, their ambitions quietly redirected, while women adjusted their behavior instinctively, unconsciously reinforcing her authority. Every betrayal, humiliation, insult, and act of greed she had endured or observed had become a tool, catalogued in her mind and deployed with precise timing, turning human behavior into an instrument of her will. Madness had sharpened her perception to a terrifying degree, clarity, and cruelty fused into an instinct that anticipated motives, exposed secrets, and converted resistance into compliance before it could manifest. Her outward wealth and reputation were meaningless compared to the empire of influence she had built in silence, invisible yet absolute. Even the town's most calculating, most confident minds were now instruments in her design, their actions feeding her dominion while they believed themselves free. She had discovered a truth few ever understand. Power is not seized through confrontation or force. It is quietly orchestrated through observation, patience, and manipulation of the human psyche. And those who survive ultimate betrayal are uniquely equipped to wield it with absolute precision. By mastering the hidden currents of ambition, desire, and fear, she had become untouchable, a silent architect of fate whose influence shaped lives, alliances, and outcomes without ever exposing the mechanisms behind it. The town itself had become a testament to her mastery, invisible, unavoidable, and irreversible. And in that quiet, terrifying dominion lay the final lesson for those who dared to witness her story. Ultimate suffering does not merely break. It forges predators capable of bending reality itself, leaving every person they touch forever altered. Caught in a system they cannot escape, her dominion had reached a point where it no longer required effort. Its presence alone dictated the flow of life in the town. Men who had once flaunted arrogance now hesitated in every action, their choices quietly shaped by invisible currents she had set in motion, their confidence eroded without understanding why. Women, sensing the silent authority she exuded, adjusted instinctively, aligning their behavior in ways that reinforced her unseen rule. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every act of greed or lust she had endured or observed had been converted into tools of control, feeding an invisible network of influence so precise that resistance became inconceivable before it even formed. Madness and clarity had merged within her, producing a mind capable of anticipating human behavior with terrifying accuracy, exposing weaknesses before they were recognized, and converting defiance into obedience without ever revealing the mechanisms behind it. Her wealth, her outward status, even her reputation were meaningless compared to the empire she had built in the shadows, a kingdom constructed entirely of knowledge, observation, and the manipulation of human frailty. Even the cleverest, most calculating men and women acted in alignment with her design, their actions feeding her power while they remained unaware, believing themselves autonomous. She had come to understand the cruelest truth: domination need not be fought for. It only needs to be understood, orchestrated, and applied patiently. Those who survive ultimate betrayal and humiliation do not simply endure. They evolve into predators capable of bending human reality, rewriting social hierarchies, and shaping outcomes without ever lifting a hand. By mastering the currents of desire, fear, and ambition, she had become untouchable, invisible, and absolute, a force no one could oppose, her power proving that true mastery lies not in force, but in the quiet, relentless manipulation of the world and the people within it.by now. Her authority was no longer subtle, it was inevitable. The town's every movement, every whispered alliance, every ambition and hesitation, had come to reflect the invisible architecture she had constructed from fear, desire, and weakness. Men who once believed themselves untouchable faltered, their decisions quietly corralled, their confidence eroded by pressures they could not perceive. Women, sensing the current she controlled, adjusted instinctively, unknowingly reinforcing her dominance. Every betrayal, humiliation, or act of greed she had endured or observed had become ammunition in a mind honed by suffering and sharpened by clarity, a mental empire capable of anticipating and directing human behavior before it emerged. Madness and brilliance had fused to create a predator whose knowledge of desire and fear was absolute, whose patience allowed her to orchestrate outcomes without ever showing her hand. Wealth, reputation, and outward status were trivial compared to this invisible dominion. Even the cleverest, most calculating people acted in alignment with her design, feeding her empire while believing themselves free. She had become the silent architect of fate itself, demonstrating the ultimate truth. Those who survive ultimate betrayal do not merely recover, they transcend, bending the currents of ambition, fear, and perception to their will, reshaping reality around them with surgical precision. The town, once a place of ordinary life, now existed as a reflection of her mastery, a silent testament to what patience, observation, and deep understanding of human frailty can create. And in this, she embodied the most terrifying knowledge, that true power is invisible, unstoppable, and irrevocable, leaving everyone who encounters it forever altered, trapped within the architecture of influence they never realized existed, a permanent monument to the predator who emerged from betrayal unbroken, unchallenged, and absolute. And now, her story reaches its dark, inescapable conclusion. The sister sold for $1 had not simply returned. She had transformed every life she touched, bending reality itself to her invisible will. The town, once a place of ordinary greed, lust, and ambition, now existed as an extension of her mastery. Every man, every woman, every whispered word, every choice, aligned, without awareness, to the architecture she had quietly constructed over years of suffering, humiliation, and betrayal. Madness had been her teacher, pain her mentor, and cruelty her instrument. Each had forged a mind capable of predicting desires before they emerged, of exposing weakness before it was recognized, and of converting defiance into obedience without ever revealing the mechanisms behind it. Wealth, titles, and social standing were meaningless in comparison to the power she now wielded, absolute, invisible, and irreversible. Those who had once sought to dominate her had unwittingly trained the predator they now feared, and the lesson she embodied is as brutal as it is simple. Ultimate betrayal does not break you. It creates an apex predator, a master of influence, a silent architect of fate whose reach extends beyond comprehension. Her dominion was not maintained through force, intimidation, or open conflict. It existed in the subtle orchestration of perception, fear, and desire, shaping every outcome and leaving all who encountered it irrevocably altered. And as you, the witness of this story, absorb this truth, you must recognize that the knowledge she wields is dangerous, intoxicating, and transformative. Those who survive unimaginable cruelty can rise untouchable, invisible, and absolute, capable of bending the currents of human behavior to their will. Remember this. Power is not always declared. It is quietly built, invisibly applied, and in its mastery, it reshapes the world. If you have understood even a fraction of this, type "I see the shadows" twice to claim your awareness, your initiation into the truths most were never meant to know, and step into a reality forever changed by the knowledge of how deep, invisible mastery can alter every life it touches.